New research on best practices in end-to-end supply chain integration. That's the topic of my conversation today with Michael Burnette. He is director of the Global Supply Chain Institute at the University of Tennessee. Michael, welcome.
Thank you.
What is the genesis of this research paper that the university did?
Well, at the University of Tennessee is the home of the Global Supply Chain Institute, and the institute was formed because over the last decade we've been the #1 rated academic university on supply chain research. Unfortunately, most of that research is not business friendly. So we formed the institute to try to translate the top-rated research into what we call applied research that the everyday business professional can use to drive value. Now, one of the things we interface with hundreds of companies a year, and what we found as a single stream through there is that there are 6 end-to-end supply chain strategies that the benchmark companies are using today. They've really kind of graduated from Lean and Six Sigma and TPM. Very few of the top companies are doing that today, and they've moved into these 6. One of those 6 is end-to-end supply chain integration.
And when we say end-to-end, do we really mean it?
Well, it's very difficult. Let me just say that. But we interviewed 16 companies that we considered benchmark. Of those 16, there were 3 or 4 that were really end-to-end focused, from the tier 3 supplier all the way to consumption. And the other 14 or 15 had some parts of that value that they were creating in some elements of the supply chain.
So what goes into an end-to-end supply chain integration strategy anyway? How do you get your hands around that whole concept?
End-to-end supply chain integration in some ways is very simple. It involves a lot of work though. You have to map the entire supply chain from every tier 3 supplier, tier 2, tier 1, all the way through to consumption. And for large global complex companies that might have 50 supply chains operating in that many categories, it's a lot of work, okay? And unfortunately, if you just map part of it, it doesn't really work. It's not integrated in that way. So the simplest way to think about this, I'll use an example of a tier 1 supplier. Let's say they're making a bottle that you're going to fill. And then you have a manufacturing unit that's going to fill that bottle. So you have the activity node of the producing the bottle, you have the transportation to the manufacturer, and then you have the activity node of the manufacturing. And what the best of the best are doing is they're looking at that relationship and everyone like it on their supply chain map at 2 levels. One at the strategic level. So if the supplier is on a throughput strategy and the manufacturer is on a responsiveness strategy, you have no integration. Okay, so that's identified, and then you need to analyze that lack of integration. Is there any value you could create from being on the same strategy? And as you know, this may be very difficult because the supplier may be feeding multiple customers, okay? Then at the next level down, we're going to look at the activity level. So we're going to first look at the 4 main areas would be materials, manufacturing, people, systems, and information and decision making. So like on the materials front, is this bottle, the material specs for that bottle, if the supplier's making it to plus or minus 1%, and the manufacturer needs it to plus or minus 0.1%, there's no integration. So you know you're going to have waste in the supply system. Manufacturing, the same thing. What's the process capability of the manufacturing of the supplier versus the process capability of the manufacturing in the supply chain? People systems, if you don't have systems to talk and communicate, that's a problem. And probably the biggest form of lack of integration is in decision making and data. The honest truth is most executives in the supply chain, when they make a decision, the entire end-to-end supply chain does not react to that. The parts around them do, or some maybe important parts do, but if you're going to put a product on hold and only 12% of your supply chain puts it on hold, you can see the waste that it's creating. If that tier 3 supplier is still producing, then you're going to have waste.
It seems almost impossible that once you have discovered the lack of integration in a complex supply chain, it doesn't mean what do you do to integrate it? I mean, there are certain reasons why, institutional reasons why it's not integrated. Incentives are different for each step along the supply chain. Is it possible indeed to integrate it once you've discovered the problems in the supply chain?
That's a fantastic question. The truth is you are going to have to prioritize. But honestly, those top 3 or 4 companies, they found the process of mapping this out and understanding where they were integrated and where they were not integrated was an extremely valuable piece of information to them. You know, most of the opportunity that you have to drive supply chain results is in the design of the supply chain. Many of these supply chains are designed 40 or 50 years ago when the biggest customer was not Amazon, okay?
And a lot of production was domestic at the time.
Right, so the strategies, the equipment, the material capabilities are designed 50 years ago. So, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's tremendous, it really creates a new paradigm on what your opportunities for value creation are. And we found in these 3 companies, they threw away their old savings list and created another one 3 or 4 times bigger.
So best practices, I mean, you're already suggesting what some of those are. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
We found 8 best practices. I hit on 3 of those. 1, mapping the supply chain. It seems simple. It's not easy, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of leadership commitment. Number 2, simplify, streamline, and then integrate. So before you get off on how am I going to put the screwdriver in there and fix this integration problem, we found, again, in not just the top 3, all 16, if they just simplified the system and took the steps out that they really don't need today, there were tremendous savings. And it's simpler than integration, okay? So if you have, we found a company that had 18 different material specs for glycerin. They needed 2. So why are you going to integrate all 18 of those? And they had like 7 suppliers for those 18. We don't have to integrate that. Let's get it down to 1 supplier that can make 2 specs, and then we can set it up the way we want when we rebid the business.
Boy, that's some low-lying fruit, isn't it? That seems like stuff that's so
obvious. And then the third one is talent. I mean, you have to have supply chain leadership has to relearn the end-to-end focus, not so much worrying about procurement or manufacturing. Those you have to worry about those, but how do they all fit together? You know, one of the interesting things in the top companies, they found a lot of savings, which I anticipated, but they also found that some systemic customer service issues that they had had for 10 years, when every department had reported that they did their job and they still had a customer service problem, they were able to find those systemic issues in their supply system because it wasn't about the individual activity. It was the glue that formed the activity.
The relationship between them. What role does technology play in helping to achieve integration?
Well, in fact, now it's a huge role. The digitization, the tools that we have today, just the fact of mapping the supply chain, there's software programs, information systems. Like one of the things that the best of the best, when they map it, they measure the time between the activities, not the cost, or they'll either measure the time or the reliability, because those things drive quality, value, so forth. And there's software programs that can help with that. And then you can imagine there's a huge amount of data. So you need big data, you need analytics to analyze how this would affect in a complex global.
Yeah, interesting. We're talking about lack of communication with all these various things, and then you tell me at the very top of our discussion that you didn't feel like your research up to this point was business friendly, and you've managed to do that now. So do you think that you're being able to do a better job of communicating with the business world will help them to understand the value of proceeding in this direction?
And it's why we're doing the white paper series. We have 15 of them now, and we're getting that feedback where we're able to translate the academic data, talk to the best of the best, right? And to some extent, it complements the academic data. And then we write these papers where they can be read in an hour, once a month in your lunch and learn. You can have the leadership team read it, and then you can come in and challenge it. I don't agree with that, I agree with that. We don't really, our goal isn't to get you to agree with all the 8 best practices. We just want you to debate it and figure out what's best for your enterprise.
Yeah, tailor it to. Well, this is fantastic, this idea that maybe we possibly could move in the direction of true end-to-end supply chain integration with these best practices as a guide. Michael, thank you so much for being with us to explain your research.
Enjoyed being here.
Really appreciate it. I've been speaking with Michael Burnette of the University of Tennessee. Thank you very much for watching.